Hi everyone. I'm going to be showing you a strategy demonstration where students will be practicing how to predict the meaning of unknown words using context clues. I would start off by talking to my students about how using context clues is a strategy that all good, strong readers should do, whether they are adults or students. When you come across a word that you don't know, using the text around that word can be a great way to predict the meaning of that word. I would start off by then talking to students about the various types of context clues that they might use when they are reading. The first example I would give them is a context clue where the text offers them the definition or an explanation of the word within the passage. And I'd show them an example of what that might look like. This example shows them how the word tenaciously is defined and explained within the passage, helping them to determine the meaning of that word. Never one to give up, Sharon worked tenaciously to find a job for the summer, and her tireless efforts finally paid off when she was offered a position at Starbucks. I would then ask the students, what do you think tenaciously might mean, and how did you know that? And we would talk about the fact that the text offered us the definition and explanation of the word within the passage. We knew that her efforts were tireless. We knew that she was never one to give up. And so using those terms, we were able to understand that she is hardworking and determined in her efforts to find a job. Another example I would show them is that context clues can also come in the form of cause and effect relationships, and that sometimes the word isn't immediately defined, but we can look at the relationship within the passage and it sort of hints to the word's meaning. And I would show them an example. No one ever thought that East High would beat West, so when it finally happened, the East fans were euphoric. And we would discuss the fact that we don't really get the definition of euphoric in the passage, but when we know that no one ever believed that this school could beat this other school, that clearly the effect of that finally happening would cause them to be extremely happy. And we could discuss how the cause and effect relationship within the passage allowed us to understand the predict the meaning of the word. Another type that they might come across that I would go over with the students would be where there is a synonym for the word within the passage. It might be clarified in simpler language for the students. For example, preparations for Devin's birthday were covert, and his friends were able to keep it a secret from him until the last minute. Well, right then and there, we noticed that they were keeping it a secret, and so we're able to determine the meaning of the word using a synonym for it within the passage. And the last example I would show the students are contrast and antonym context clues. Sometimes a word or phrase is clarified because the opposite meaning is somewhere in the passage, and we have to look for those signal words that let us know that we're looking for a contrast or an antonym. Signal words such as but, despite, although, however, and not. And in the example, we see that signal word, one of those signal words being used. When Mr. Carrier first arrived in Cleveland, people thought he was a fine and honest gentleman, but time soon showed him to be an absolute rogue. Right off the bat, I would make sure that students notice that word but, and that is a clue that we are looking for an antonym for rogue. And we can see that if he wasn't a fine and honest gentleman, then rogue must be the opposite of being a fine and honest gentleman, and help them to see that it might mean that he's dishonest. It might mean that instead of being a gentleman, he's impolite or maybe somewhat rebellious, and show them that we used a contrast antonym clue to determine that. After having gone through all the examples, we would practice with a read aloud, where students and I were reading The Outsiders, and so we would read chapter 3, and as we read, the purpose for reading would be to look at those unfamiliar words in the passage and use context clues to determine the meaning of those words, and reminding them of the 4 different types of context clues that we might come across as we read. At that point, I would show them an example. The students use a reader response journal in which they record an excerpt from the text in the left column and their reader response in the right column. The P that you see in parentheses stands for prediction. And looking at context clues to predict words is a type of prediction strategy when reading. And so I'd show the students that we came across the word gallantly. And in the passage, we see that Cherry and Marcia, 2 of the Soch girls, didn't have a way to get home, and Two-Bit gallantly offered to walk them home. And I would model for them how I think that gallantly might mean heroically or helpfully. And I think this because Two-Bit was helping the girls to get home safely when they didn't have a ride. And I used a cause and effect context clue to determine this. Because they didn't have a ride home, and Two-Bit offered to walk them home, we can then infer that he is somewhat heroic or helpful to them. At that point, I would show them another example. And this time we look at the word aloofness. And the text said that Soches were always behind a wall of aloofness, careful not to let their real selves show through. And I would ask the students to record in their reader response journals what they think aloofness might mean. I would give them a few moments to do that, and then we would discuss together. This is our guided practice piece within the lesson. And we would discuss together that aloofness means hidden or secretive or distant, because the passage told us with an explanation and definition that they're not letting their real selves show through. So in a way, they are hiding or being secretive. And we would discuss that together. The next part of the piece is really the independent practice piece. The students are reading their independent reading books, which they have chosen. They're books that are of interest to them, and they're also books that are at their proper reading level. And so the student's task while reading would be to use context clues to predict the meaning of unknown words, and using the 4 different types of context clues we had discussed. They would record their thinking and their predictions in their reader response journals, and they'd want to also make sure to record which type of context clue they were using. And this is a way for them to practice that skill, but apply it to a new text, one that we're not reading together. At this point, after they've had some time to be reading on their own and recording in their journals, we would come back together as a class for an exit slip. This is a form of formative assessment that I would use to look at their understanding of context clues and using those to determine words. They would complete this exit slip before class was over. So I would have an opportunity to look at how they are doing and what they need clarification on for tomorrow's lesson. Their journals are also a form of formative assessment where I can go back and look at their reader responses and look at who I need to conference with the following day to help to clarify any of their misconceptions about context clues. I hope you enjoyed my strategy demonstration. Looking forward to your feedback.